and Evolution Redux by Kevin Pinto, Paola Pereira, and Cindy Lauren. In his book, The Descent of Man, Darwin proposed the thought that our species came from Africa, since our closest relatives, gorillas and chimpanzees, are both found there. However, this was only a hunch. In 1924, Raymond Dart rediscovered what he named Australopithecus africanus, or southern ape man, and was considered the missing link. In the years preceding these events, fossils and DNA sequences have been used to establish humans within the tree of evolution. Coyne reaffirms that we descended from other apes and that our closest cousin is the chimpanzee, whose ancestors diverged from our own several million years ago. That these facts should give us a sense of satisfaction and wonder, since this connects us to all organisms. Despite these facts, some people are reluctant to accept Darwinism as it applies to human evolution, as was demonstrated by the monkey trial of 1925. Australopithecus africanus, also known as Tom's Child, set off the hunt for human ancestors in Africa. The Tom's Child, discovered by Dart, was the skull of an infant. It still had milk teeth and erupting molars. It had a mixture of human and ape-like traits. However, without fossils like the Tom's Child, we would still know that humans have a place on the tree of evolution. Linnaeus proposed that human anatomy placed us in the order of primates, which all share traits like forward-facing eyes, fingernails, color vision, and opposable thumbs. Other features place us in the superfamily Hominoidea. Molecular data confirms these relationships, but fossil evidence is still more psychologically convincing than molecular data. While we would expect to trace human evolution through fossils, the fossil record for human ancestry is not continuous. There are many branching species that have gone extinct without leaving descendants. The main issue is revealed to be that there are too few species spread over a large geographic area to make a confident decision of what fossil branches off from another. The discovery of Australopithecus afarensis, famously known as Lucy, is a great transition form between humans and ancient apes. Her anatomy indicates that Lucy walked upright and her pelvis resembles modern humans more than that of modern chimps.
Coyne describes the biggest unknown about human evolution was the disappearance of Homo erectus around 300,000 years ago and the sudden uprising of Homo sapiens. There are two theories correlated with this unknown. The multi-regional theory is described by Coyne as an evolutionary replacement. Homo erectus simply evolved into Homo sapiens independently in several areas because natural selection was acting in the same way all over Europe, Asia, and Africa. According to Tree of Life web project, the multi-regional hypothesis stipulates that Homo sapiens evolved independently all over the world from their respective native populations, and that there was some gene flow between these independent populations that prevented speciation from occurring. The second theory is the out of Africa theory. Coyne describes it as modern Homo sapiens originated in Africa and spread, physically replacing Homo erectus and the Neanderthals, perhaps by outcompeting them for food or killing them. According to the Tree of Life web project, the out of Africa theory states that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa, then left the continent 50,000 to 100,000 years ago and replaced native populations in other parts of the world. Evidence supports both theories, but there is more support for the out of Africa theory. There is more archaeological evidence for this theory because artifacts typical of Homo sapiens were found in Africa much earlier than in other parts of the world. At archaeological sites in Europe, a sudden change in artifacts was observed around the time Homo sapiens were believed to have left Africa. This sudden appearance of new artifacts indicates that they did not evolve gradually from native populations but came from Africa and introduced themselves into the population. Creationists will argue that hominin fossils are two distinct groups of organisms, apes and humans. They tend to argue that humans were an exception to evolution and we were created by a divine power. However, some are unable to classify the hominin fossils as apes or humans because they are so similar. So what is the driving force of human evolution? Bipedality was the first significant hominin trait to evolve. There are many reasons that walking erect may have had a selective advantage, such as being able to now carry food better with hands instead of knuckle walking, helping us deal with high temperature by raising our body off the ground, reducing the surface area exposed to the sun, and allowing us to use our hands to build and use tools that could have led to selection for bigger brains that envision more for complex tools. How many and what sort of genes actually differ in apes and humans? According to Coyne, the first attempt to find these differences was made in 1975 by Alan Wilson and Mary Claire King at the University of California, Berkeley. Looking at protein sequences taken from humans and chimps, they found that they differed on average by only 1%. This meant that there was a significant genetic similarities between humans and apes. Coyne then begins to explain that modern research has pointed out that a lot more than 1.5% of our proteins will differ by at least one amino acid from the sequence in chimps, that such a difference can have substantial effects. Coyne uses an example that describes amylase, an enzyme in saliva that breaks down starch into digestible sugars, and how chimps have a single copy of the gene while humans have between 2 to 6. Natural selection favored a diet rich in starch than that of fruit-eating apes. This means that even though we have some genetic resemblance to primates, there must have been substantial genetic change that allow us to evolve from ape-like ancestors. According to Coyne, some racial differences give us evidence of evolutionary pressures that acted in different areas. Sickle cell anemia, for example, is the most common in people of African descent from equatorial Africa. Carriers of sickle cell anemia have some resistance of malaria, and it's likely that the higher frequency of this mutation in African-derived populations resulted from natural selection in response to malaria. There are viable suggestions that suggest that sexual selection is a strong driving force of the evolution of races. Gene evolution, a change in cultural environment, can lead to new types of selection on genes that make sexual selection and physical differences appealing. However, the overall differences between races show that DNA data is minor among human populations. Coyne suggests that since we are delaying evolution by developing technologies that allow us to adapt to our environments, for example, we can compensate for bad genes that express tooth decay or bad vision with a pair of glasses or going to the dentist. Mortality rates from diseases like AIDS or malaria that kill humans of reproductive age will hopefully trigger more selection and resistance to these diseases. As Coyne mentioned, every species has genetic variation that responds to some form of selection. Our genome, even though we don't directly observe it, is adapting to sources of mortality.
It seems that for some groups of people, evolution will always be seen as a silly science theory. The average person does not even know what the word theory means in a scientific setting. They only hear evolutionary theory and assume it is just that, a theory, in the wrong sense of the word. Even when the evidence for evolution is extremely strong and thoroughly backed by years of experiments that have only helped support evolution, a large percentage of the population will still turn a blind eye. Some may even recognize the evidence for evolution but still not choose to believe in it, even though this isn't a matter of belief, it is fact. Creationists or intelligent design advocates claim that evolution offers no morality, that if we do teach kids from a young age that the world is just a series of random events that just so happen to produce us, that they will no doubtably lose all sense of what is right or wrong. In their eyes, if evolution really is the cause of our existence and not a higher power, then our actions must have no consequence. Intelligent design advocates become insulted when evolutionists tell them their ancestors were apes. They see no relationship between us and our sister lineage, and act as if they were just called savage monkeys. Ann Cutler, author of Godless, The Church of Liberalism and Intelligent Design advocate, claims that evolution comes from two worldviews, naturalism and materialism. Naturalism is the view that the only way to understand our world is through the scientific method. Materialism is the idea that the only reality is the physical matter of the universe. Cutler views these worldviews as evil and claims that if evolution is taught, these evil views will spill into other aspects of family life. Cutler writes, "Do whatever you feel like doing. Screw your secretary, kill your grandma, abort your defective child. Darwin says it will benefit humanity." Cutler fails to see that evolution isn't supposed to teach us morality and ethics. Evolution doesn't teach us the meaning of life. Evolution can't tell us what to do or how to behave. This negative view of evolution might be contributed to the misinterpretation of Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. The title itself confuses readers to think that evolution is nothing but selfish acts between organisms, when in reality, the title refers to the battle between genes to make it into the next generation. Though this battle could be described as selfish, we also see in nature acts of cooperation between organisms. For example, altruism. Richard Dawkins even stated that his book could have been titled The Cooperative Gene. There have only been about 250 generations of civilized society compared to the 300,000 generations humans spent living a hunter gatherer lifestyle. During this long period of time, selection surely must have played a part in the role of human evolution. This long period where humans adapted to the physical and social environment is called the environment of evolutionary adaptedness. Evolutionary psychologists claim that we humans surely must retain many behaviors that evolved in the environment of evolutionary adaptedness, even if they are no longer adaptive. Looking at it from a time perspective, it makes sense, since there hasn't been enough time for evolutionary change to take effect since the rise of modern civilization. The question is, are human behaviors all down to evolution? We humans have a number of behaviors that are sometimes used to distinguish us from animals. These behaviors are called human universals. Some examples are symbolic language, decorative arts, supernatural belief, and love of sweets. We shouldn't assume, though, that all these behaviors have some genetically based adaptation. The danger is that it becomes too easy to make up an evolutionary reason to why modern human behaviors should be adaptive in the environment of evolutionary adaptedness. Rape can be seen as a way to forcibly increase one's fitness, and art and literature could be seen as the equivalent to a peacock's feather. While yes, humans do have some behaviors that seem to have arisen outside an evolutionary context, we have behaviors that appear in other lineages. These shared behaviors between lineages can only be explained through common descent. Some examples of these behaviors are eating, sleeping, parental care, and favoring relatives over non-relatives. We also see parallels of sexual selection between humans and animals. In most cases, the male sex is larger and stronger than the female. This is true for the human species as well. But this difference in body size could also be explained by natural selection. The division of labor between sexes could explain the sexual dimorphism we see in humans. Men might be stronger not because they competed for mates, but because they hunted, while women foraged and took care of the children. At the end of the day, genes are not our puppet masters. Sure, some human behaviors are the consequence of years of evolution acting on our genes, but it is not the end all be all. For example, equality between sexes is now taken for granted in many nations, and we worry more about the treatment of animals, and for a matter of fact, the treatment of our world. None of these behaviors arose because of evolution. The change happened too fast to be because of our genes. Our genes only tell us where we came from, not where we are going. While we may at one time have been slaves to the evolutionary process, we are no longer contained by its shackles. We have managed to free ourselves from the grip of evolution, but not completely. Though it has been thought that modern humans are no longer evolving due to housing, sanitation, medical science, and other modern inventions, that is not the case. Researchers analyzed records of birth, marriages, and deaths for 10,000 individuals across Finland since the beginning of the 18th century. They concluded that evolution is still in effect despite all the modern advances in the human population. What led to that conclusion was that they saw an increase in the survivability of offspring. Two-thirds of children born in the 1860s managed to survive to adulthood. That has risen to 94% during the 1940s. At the same time, people went from having an average of 5 children to 1.6 children. Cultural factors such as contraception played a role in the decreasing fecundity. Dr. Bolin went on to say, as long as there is variation in the population in terms of reproduction, there will be a difference in reproductive success, which means that there is something for natural selection to work on. Not only do we see this in Finland, we see this across the world. Countries have different reproductive success rates. Some, like Japan, have a negative population growth rate, therefore means that they have an extremely low reproductive success rate, while other countries like Lebanon have a high population growth rate. One must remember that one of the assumptions of natural selection is a difference in reproductive and survival rates, and we see just that in the human population.
In Yana Kambarov's introduction, she briefly references another study, Abundant Pleiotrophy in the Human Complex of Diseases and Traits, explaining that many genes have unknown pleiotropic effects, making their adaptive advantage easy to recover. The study introduced knock-in mice as models for human disease alleles. They conducted a study on ectodisplasmin A receptor, or EDAR370A. The study showed that mice prevalent with a similar EDAR gene expressed thicker hair shafts, increased mammary gland branching, increased number of eccrine glands, and sebaceous glands that secrete barriers for water loss in skin and eyes, suggesting that they were selected for a cold environment. They were humanized models that they could study to characterize a natural human gene variant. Despite some differences that can alter the similarities in this study, direct homology allowed them to study the alleles' effects in vivo in order to assess their phenotypic impact on the whole organism. 370A was selected for in East Asia, favoring an increased number of eccrine glands, a key hominid adaptation that enabled evapotranspiration during vigorous activities, and they may have been advantageous for hunters in East Asia during humid and warm seasons. The findings of this study demonstrate that humans are evolving via pleiotropic effects of several alleles. 370A demonstrated thicker hair that can assist in sexual selection, and an increased number of eccrine glands that was selected for to better adapt to warmer climates. Although Kambarov admits that studies like these have yet to be used to model the subtle phenotypic effects expected from human variation, we believe that EDAR370A is a very strong driving force that affects phenotypes in mice that could affect a very similar EDAR370V allele in humans.